and that already with the masks and the social distancing, but the numbers don't lie, and we need to look at the numbers to get the true story of what's going on, which is why we turn to our next guest to try to give us some idea about what's going on here. Paul Minshull is the CEO for Scarson Modeling and Forecasting, who look at these numbers and tell us exactly what the numbers say and possibly where we're going in the future, especially when it comes to the pandemic. Paul, welcome. Great to have you back in the program. Thanks so much for the time today.
Oh, thanks for having me on again, Bill.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the numbers, and we just got an update, and we're going to get another one from the province here in about an hour or so about the new cases of what we are calling, and I think what the province is now calling, the third wave. I don't know, Paul, that anybody thought it was going to be this severe or this long-lasting, but the numbers are telling us that it's this third wave, especially with these variants, is something that we need to be concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the numbers are pretty telling at this stage. There definitely is going to be a third wave. I think a number of jurisdictions in Canada are already well underway. Ontario probably being one of the leading ones. It's really seen an uptick in the cases, and there's actually a really great site that the Ontario Science Table has out now. It's their dashboard site, and it does a really good job of showing how the variants are growing in Ontario in particular, and I think it tells quite a concerning story for all of us as we kind of move through wave 3.
Yeah, and again, we're trying to get a handle on exactly what it is we're dealing with, and I know epidemiology is not your field. You're a smart guy, Paul, but I know that's not one of the areas you get into. But when we get that advice and they talk about what we are dealing with here, this is not the same as what we experienced a year ago. It's a variant of this, and it's a more aggressive variant of this, and apparently a more deadly variant, the one we were dealing with back in March and April of last year, and we need to be aware of that. And the numbers, I guess, pretty much indicate what many of those experts had told us about how quickly this can spread.
Yeah, and the site that I just mentioned there, it does an incredibly good job of kind of presenting that in a way where it's very black and white. It basically shows the reproductive rate, the rate at which the two different types of COVID are reproducing. The early variant and then the variants of concern, and it's incredibly clear there that what's driving this growth is the variants, and it's driving it up at a rate where it's kind of moving through those levels of framework, right, from yellow to orange to red. So there's no doubt that's what's driving it, and as you said, it's not only more transmissive but can lead to potentially more severe cases and even potentially higher mortality.
Well, as we were tracking the numbers, and I know you guys do this on a daily basis, the thing that really caught my attention, Paul, was we were told by the experts that there's possibly going to be a third wave, and we were told that there were now variants, and of course that raised a million questions among all of us. Well, what do you mean? And it's these things morph as every virus does. The flu virus there's variants in that too, which is why we have to get a flu shot every year because we don't know which one's going to come along. But we heard about the UK and the South African variant and the California variant, and we thought, okay, and there'd be one or two cases of that. But what amazes me, Paul, is how quickly those variants, the new cases of the variants, have now superseded the ones from the old virus. I mean, that I think speaks to just how rapidly this can spread.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of it kind of in animal terms, it's a predator, right? So it's going to overcome that older variant, and I'm not sure. I mean, there was some evidence from Europe earlier on. I think we were all quite hopeful that Canada maybe would progress a little bit slower, but it's definitely now in very, very high growth phase. And when you take it, what does that mean to the average listener there? We've all been cautious for a year, given what was out there, and this is definitely much higher risk. So, even though we're all fatigued, I've been stuck in a house for a year, we can't let our guards down. In fact, we have to be almost even more vigilant right now because you can get this with even less exposure. And I think we all feel like the vaccines are out and, so maybe we don't need to worry as much. Yes, the vaccines are out and they're ultimately going to be the thing that takes us out of this. But, clearly the variants have moved faster than the vaccine. So, we have to be very careful in all of these, masks, distancing, what's, needed, social contact, and that definitely for the next 30 to 60 days.
Well, because we have to be realistic about this, and I don't know that too many of us are right now, because I share the same feelings as you do. I've been working from home for about a year now too, as many of our colleagues have right around the country for that matter, and you get a little tired. You say, oh, come on, it's about time. Let's just back off. And now we're finding out that this could be even more dangerous. And we get this false sense of security. I mean, I agree with you. The vaccines are ultimately going to be the weapon that's going to help us to defeat this thing, or at least to contain this thing. And we're not there yet. I mean, the number I saw earlier this week, Paul, was that I think it was like 2.5% of the population have been vaccinated. And we need to be up over 95 for herd immunity to take place. We got a long way to go.
I think, the positive thing about where we're at now is that any of the high-risk people, so people in long-term care or the elderly, any of those people that have been vaccinated, even if they've only had one, they're very well protected. And so that kind of separates, how many cases do we have versus who's actually getting the cases. And so I think the one positive there is, we're seeing kind of less elderly people getting it because of that. And they're usually the ones that have the most risk of dying and being in the hospital. But there is also, though, I think solid anecdotal stuff coming out that, some of the younger, healthier people are actually getting sicker with the new variant. So that's obviously of great concern.
Yeah, and that's the thing that we didn't see with the first wave, and possibly even for the second as well. I think a lot of people in the younger demographic probably thought that they were, at least one politician said they were immune from it. They're not. And the numbers are telling a story here, too, that younger demographic, that under 25 so demographic, has seen a real spike in new cases. And that may well be reflected about their behavior. Maybe they don't believe in masking and social distancing to the extent. Heaven knows we saw, and I know you saw the pictures from Florida last week. It was the U.S. March breakdown there, and of course they all go to the sunspots, and it was out of control, really. And we hate to think of what those numbers are going to look like as a result of those get-togethers. But I think it just speaks to, as you said, where we are emotionally right now and psychologically, and it's really tough to, I guess, to summon up enough fortitude to simply say, look, I got to keep on course here. It's pretty difficult for a lot of us.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think I mentioned to you before I had a kidney transplant, so I'm very high risk. I haven't been vaccinated. I have to kind of remind myself every day that, my risk of getting this and my risk of potentially going to hospital dying is actually higher now than it probably has ever been so far in the pandemic. And so I have to remind myself, look, not only should I not be letting my guard down, I should probably be even more potentially thoughtful in the next 30 to 60 days. And again, we do feel that as the vaccines really get pushed out there, it will really start to have a strong benefit in decelerating the cases. But we always have to keep in mind too, there's uncertainty about virtually every aspect of this, and there's been a lot of news about the AZ vaccine and some recent reports about the EU thinking they might restrict exports. So, it's a very fluid situation, and I think it just, again, comes back to we need to continue to be vigilant and not kind of wave off this wave 3. I mean, a lot of our modeling is showing the wave 3 in a lot of jurisdictions will exceed what happened in wave 2 in terms of cases.
How does that make you feel as a vulnerable individual that we're not only why we not out of this, but we may be facing our biggest challenge yet?
Yeah, I mean, I have the same anxieties I think that tons of people do. I'm desperate to be able to go online and book my vaccine. I'm hoping that will be in April. Definitely changes my risk profile, but it also still, we're a society together, so that doesn't mean that we shouldn't all be pulling towards the goal of getting everybody in Ontario out of that. And I think, at this stage, the numbers are going to continue to go up. People need to kind of, take that for what it is and not dismiss it.
Because I share your concern. I mean, I've talked to a number of people who, by the way, are in the same circumstances you. Might have been an organ transplant, a number with autoimmune diseases, cancer patients who are more vulnerable, of course, because their autoimmune system is down, sometimes because of the medication. And I think there was an expectation from a lot of them, Paul, before this whole thing rolled out, that they were going to be near the top of the list. I mean, obviously, we wanted people in long-term care and first responders there, but I personally expected to see people like you and so many others that I've talked to closer to the top of the list. And I'm not quite sure what the prioritization is right now, but I know that vaccine availability plays a role in this as well. But it just adds to the frustration and angst, I guess, that we're all feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing we have to keep in mind is nothing is easy around the decision making. There are demands from lots of different stakeholder groups. Every stakeholder group has a story of why they should be prioritized. So it's a challenge. I mean, I guess the way I look at it is, of course, I wish people that were at highest risk, in addition to age, were at the front. But if it's an extra few weeks, I just have to stay vigilant until that. But, I think, again, we need to kind of recognize everybody plays a role in this and, I think be ready to respond. I think there's no doubt. Like, it's growing at rates where, we're going to be asked as citizens to, again, likely make sure we're limiting our behavior. Because in this one here, a lot of what potentially is controlling wave 3 is the vaccines.
Yeah.
Right? So it's much more vaccines than doing the stay-at-home order. So the less we lead to that, the less probable they'll have to take more stringent measures. So there's something in it for everyone by continuing to stay kind of vigilant in this period.
Paul, let me ask you, you at Sarskin Modeling and Forecasting have been analyzing these numbers from the beginning, of course. So we've gone through phase 1 and looked at that data, phase 2, and now, according to the experts, we're into phase 3. I'm not so sure how deeply you are into it. Both the first and second phases led us to some form of lockdowns where they just said, all right, enough of it, just turn the lights out, wait a few weeks, and let's see what happens then. Based on the data you're seeing, and it's accumulating now in phase 3, are politicians going to have to make that decision sooner than later?
Well, they're definitely going to have to face tough decisions as the cases rise, and they're already rising. And they don't, at this stage, the momentum you're seeing, it's not like it's all of a sudden going to stop. It's going to continue to grow. So they're going to be faced with that. And they're faced with a very tough balancing decision of, the implications mental health-wise, business-wise, and so on. I think a lot of the balance of that is again, how the vaccines are playing out with that. So, it's not going to be an easy decision. And I think, when they've crossed that bridge and how well and effective the vaccines are being deployed will be kind of a big determinant in what kind of framework they implement.
And that's the situation. I mean, we want to go back again a year. When we were coming out of that first phase, which is just around, April, May, that time of year, they were easing restrictions. Okay, you can maybe play a little bit of golf in some places and things of this nature. And that, I think, assuaged a lot of the mental concerns that we were going through right now. To actually go into that nice warmer weather when we want to be outdoors more often and all of a sudden say, well, everything's closed for 3 weeks, if that's what it's going to be, is going to be somewhat problematic. I don't know anybody that wants to do it, including politicians, but the numbers, as you guys tell us, they don't lie. They tell a story, and there's a very disturbing trend, something that we really need to pay attention to, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think the one thing I haven't mentioned on this side was the hospitalizations. I mean, one of the things that's I think quite concerning, particularly when you look at Ontario, is the number of people in ICU from second wave. I mean, there's a little bit of a dip, but not much. So we're kind of going into the third wave with still a significant number of beds filled relating to people almost from the second. So I think the last time I looked, it was 370. So, that puts a lot of pressure on, as we start adding beds here, again, will likely exceed the amount of beds that were in wave 2. And so hospital capacity is definitely a very, I think, big concern here, particularly if it's somehow drawing in younger, healthier people into beds.
Well, here's hoping that, as you say, that it's not going to just happen overnight that we see a decrease in this. There's going to have to be a change in behavior, ramping up of the vaccine program. There's a number of different factors here, which is why we rely on folks like you, Paul, and your great company there at Scarson Modeling to tell us what the numbers tell us, and because that's where the trends are. And that's basically, as we've been saying for the last year, the numbers that you guys are analyzing are the same numbers the government looks at, and that's how they determine policy, whether there's going to be lockdown or what's going to stay open, what's going to stay closed, and when we can get back to quote unquote normal, whenever that might be. More to come on this, as they say in the business, because the numbers are changing almost on a weekly basis. Thanks so much for this, Paul. It's great talking with you again. Stay well, and I know we'll talk again soon.
Well, thank you very much, Bill.
You're listening to the Bill Kelly Show podcast on 900 CHML.
I want to talk about the announcement from yesterday.